Hi, this is Uncle Matt's D&D Neighborhood. I'm Matt Finch, and I have here with me as my guest Tom Tullis, who is famous for all kinds of things, some of them nefarious and sinister, others of them more innocent. Say hi, Tom.
Hey, everybody.
Just before we start, I'd like to remind everybody to please remember to subscribe to the channel. We also have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/Uncle Matt. And with that, let's move on to talking with Tom. And so, Tom, what you're doing most recently, you're a terrain guy for the most part, up until very shortly in the future.
Pretty recently, yeah.
And so you've gone all the way from flat two-dimensional illustrations because you're a graphic artist, and then you went to fold-up buildings, and now you're doing stuff with 3D. So talk, and then before that, you drew pictures of World War II airplanes, right?
Yeah, I illustrated books on military aviation for about 20 years before I had Fat Dragon. So kind of big change there, going from military history publications to gaming, but worked out pretty nice.
Yep, and I should mention Fat Dragon Games is Tom's company, and I'm sure it'll come up as we're going, but since we're talking about 3D printing, if in case we get onto just that topic, Fat Dragon Games is the name of it, and what they're doing mainly right now is they sell 3D print files. So okay, let's move on and start talking about terrain. And since what you're in the middle of is 3D terrain, and you're going to be having a line of 3D minis, tell me a little bit about how that works, because I don't have a 3D printer. So
okay, 3D printing has actually been around for a very long time. The first FDM printers were introduced around 1989. And when I used to work in the hobby industry, we had stereolithographic machines that we did prototyping on and such. But consumer 3D printers are something that started about 10 years ago with the RepRap movement, which was a group of hobbyists that would build these printers from parts, you'd get at Radio Shack or something, stepper motors and steel rods and stuff, and they would print out the custom pieces necessary to take the common electronic items and convert them into a 3D printer. And it was this whole hobbyist maker movement that really progressed the technology over the last 10 years privately, because a lot of the patents involved in this were held by two corporations, and those started expiring about it was about 5 years ago, I guess. And that's why you've seen such an explosion with Prusa and Printerbot and MakerBot and all these other companies that are producing home 3D printers now, is because those patents that were held by Strasis and 3D Systems expired. So it went from being just a hobbyist activity over the last decade to now there's a professionally made consumer 3D printers available. And there are two basic technologies to it. One is the most common, which is known as FDM, fused deposition modeling. And that's where you have a spool of plastic filament. It is fed into a small brass nozzle, kind of like a glue gun, melted and extruded out. And then those layers are extruded out one after the other to build up a 3D object. The other type is a photo-cured resin, which you either uses a laser to cure layer by layer, or a digital light projector like you would have on an LCD projector in a meeting. Those are a lot more expensive, so they're a lot less common for home users. But the latter, the resin printers, were what have traditionally been used for miniatures up until this point, because they could get all the fine details and stuff. And people, by and large, considered fused deposition model printers to not be able to do fine detail work for minis. They were great for terrain, but not for miniatures. And that has kind of been the prevailing wisdom ever since I got into 3D printing, was you just didn't do it for miniatures. And probably about 2 years ago, when we had our first Kickstarter for Dragonlock, we introduced a line of orcs and a line of lizardmen miniatures, just to kind of start experimenting with this and pushing the envelope of what we could do with this. And we had two sets of these minis that you could print without any support network or anything, which, if you don't know anything about 3D printing, since this builds up from the ground up, if you imagine trying to print the letter T, by the time you get up to the two crossbars, if you extrude plastic out in midair, it's just going to fall down. So if you wanted to print the letter T, you'd have to have a lattice work going up that would support those two arms going out that you would then cut off once the print was done. For a mini, that doesn't work too great because a mini has a lot of very fine details, a sword, a spear, whatever. And if you're cutting those things off, it's very brittle. You're just going to break those off too. So what we've come up with is a design methodology for the miniatures where they self-support. So we can print miniatures now through our line on a FDM printer, which is the most common. They start around $200 by simply adding a $10 fine detail nozzle to it, combining that with our new design methodology of self-supporting miniatures that people can now get injection molded quality at home for about 10 cents a miniature.
Okay, so let's back up a second. The design methodology you're talking about is not something that the user has to worry about. That's simply
Correct.
the
We're
way that you
taking care
build
of all
the
that.
file. And so that's the fact simply that you've figured out a way around the issue of stuff needing external
Exactly.
support. Okay.
What we want is people to be able to buy our file, download it, just plug it in the printer and hit print with no prep work and no cleanup afterwards that they have to do. We just want to be able to send that file to the printer, print it out, and have them have a usable mini straight off the bed.
So you started to answer one of the questions because I want to start out a little basic as we move to it. So you mentioned $200 right now, and I will say for everybody that it is March 29th, 2018 when we're talking. So these numbers may change if you're watching this in the future. But right now the base cost is about $200. Is a $200 type printer going to work with the stuff that you're doing, or do you need something that's a little better than that?
No, we've actually got a couple of our customers that are testing these designs for me. One of them has a $220 monoprice mini V2, which is probably one of the best selling printers in the world right now, just because it is a $220 3D printer that, if you're just getting into the hobby, that's not a huge investment. It will print these miniatures if you just put that $10 nozzle on it. Monoprice also has a new Delta printer, which is, if you imagine a giant cylinder instead of the usual box type you see on websites and stuff, it's coming out at $180 right now. So I have not seen any prints off of it, but based on Monoprice's track record, it should do pretty well for this type of stuff.
All right, awesome. So now, before we get further into the topic of the minis, I'd like to talk about the your last Kickstarter was all about terrain, and so I'd like to sort of talk about terrain first, and then actually no, because I want to at some point I want to ask you about the relative benefits of using a 3D printer for terrain versus other types of terrain. So actually, let's stick with minis first, and then we'll flip over to terrain and do some of the comparison. You're laughing at me. I wander around all of these interviews. I could go anywhere. I don't even know where I'm going. So we'll talk about minis. And mainly what I want to know first of all is how the hell do you do the stuff if you don't carve the mini first and you don't scan the mini, and I'm told that's not the way it's done. How do you mentally get into a program and sculpt something in a non-existing three-dimensional virtual reality space and also have to buy yourself new headphones for this show?
All the work is done in a digital sculpting program. There's two very popular ones. One is what we use, which is Blender. Another is called ZBrush. And the reason I prefer for Fat Dragon, we all use Blender, is because it's not just a sculpting program. It's a hard modeling program. You can do the linkages and stuff that we use for our tiles. It will do the full rendering of the miniature when done. It's actually designed to be a piece of movie software where you could design the model, texture the model, animate and rig the model, and then actually output an animated film.
But how do you scoop out the hole for the lizard man's mouth?
Okay. For the modeling, what you do, it works very intuitively, just like actually doing a traditional sculpture. When, I used to do clay sculptures, you start out with a small mound of clay, and that's what this does. You start out with a little ball, essentially, which is your clay, and you have a selection of sculpting tools that mimic traditional sculpting tools you'd have in the real world. And you just start either adding clay to this ball or subtracting it, smoothing it, scraping it. And it's just like any other piece of art. It's just, you start with an idea in your head and you start whittling away at this, and eventually you end up with what you have in mind.
Okay, it's still entirely beyond me, but I'm going to take your word for it that that's something that a human being can do, since you're coming out with the files and doing it.
It is incredibly easy to learn.
Right. Okay. So with that, let's move on. You're coming out with miniatures in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about that. What kind of miniatures you're coming out with? Because I've seen your turtles being shown, on Facebook and some of those posts. What does the miniature line look like
right now? Because I'm still first edition AD&D diehard. A lot of what we're doing is old school themed miniatures. So we're going to have pig-faced orcs, old school style lizardmen. We have a couple packs of those coming up. Old school beholders, things like that. We have about 20 sets in the pipeline right now that will take us up to, I think, mid 2019 at this point. But we're going to have, like I said, pig-faced orcs riding wargs and things like that. All of this is designed for an FDM style 3D printer. Typical mini, here's one of them right here. 28 millimeter scale will
Hold
run
it up
you
closer to the camera.
I don't know if you can
Hold it.
see that.
Yep. Okay. Cool.
One of the great things about this technology is once you've invested in the printer, it's not like an inkjet printer where they sell you a cheap printer and then you've got a $50 tank of ink you've got to keep buying every month. The filament for these things is insanely cheap. 28 millimeter miniature will run you about a nickel to print. A standard dungeon wall like this, 2 by 2 by 2 dungeon wall, that's about 35 cents in plastic. So the downside of 3D printing is the time. A single printer, I can output about maybe 8 to 10 dungeon pieces a day. But over the month, you're going to have a few hundred. The advantage is I'm only going to spend a few dollars on that. At 35 cents per dungeon wall, I mean, you can build an enormous dungeon for under $20.
And there's an example of a dungeon that's been built out using your stuff, which is the Rapanathik level 1C, I think it is, which if you I'll put a link down to it, but there are some pictures of it from when it was being run at a convention game. So you can see that you can create something that's enormous using these.
The other advantage we have with the 3D printing is all of the stuff is designed to interlink together. So you can actually make a room out of 20, 30 pieces, have them interlinked before the game, and then just pull it out from under the table. There's no trying to assemble it during the game or anything like that. You can stack levels then and pull them off as the players go down through the dungeon. You don't have to, carefully prop everything up with, columns and everything else. And if somebody bumps the table, the whole thing goes crashing in. So, as with any of the types of terrain out there, whether it be, injection molded like Dwarven Forge or cast like Hearst Arch or 3D printing, each one has their advantages and disadvantages. And it kind of just, you've got to decide what's going to be the best fit for you as the model maker or the DM.
Well, wait. Before we move into that, because I want to have a sort of section of the show on that. Tell me more. Okay, miniatures. So when are they going to start coming out? Are you going to be doing Kickstarters for them? How much are they going to? Actually, you know what? Let me back up to you. Somebody told me, and I don't even know if this is true or not, but if somebody wants to use your files but they don't have a 3D printer, have you got like partners who'll print it out and send them to them?
Yeah, one of the things I've done is anybody that wants a license to print our models and sell them on like eBay, Etsy, or their local hobby shop or whatever, we give them a free license. They can do that. No royalties, nothing.
Have you got like a list of the people who will do that? Like if I'm in Houston, is there someone I look up?
Actually, all you got to do is go to the Dragon Lock Facebook group or on our forums and just say you're looking for a printer, and somebody will chime in real fast. You just cut out, Matt.
So it's Dragon. Yeah, sorry, I hit my mute button the wrong way. So it's Dragon. So the Facebook group is Dragon Lock. It's not under the Fat Dragon Games.
You can go to Fat Dragon Games on Facebook, and there will be a community group link on that page for Dragon Lock. But if you're going to want to find Dragon Lock printers, you need to go to the Dragon Lock community page on Facebook.
Okay, so that was my question about people who wanted to get it printed out by somebody else. So now we move on to miniatures. Tell me about what are the first packs that are going to come out? Have you got some weird shit in there that's going to be really awesome? Tell me about that.
We actually start releasing them next week.
This is a timely show.
This is perfect.
Okay, that works out. Good.
We're not kickstarting them. Kickstarter has advantages, and I'm not going to get into it, but Kickstarter has definite advantages and it has definite disadvantages. So we're trying to balance out new releases. Some things we kickstart each year and some things we're not. For example, we just came out with our 3D printed war game, World War Tesla, a few months ago, and we didn't Kickstarter. That was a straight release to War Game Vault and Drive Through RPG. We didn't go through Kickstarter. We had that in production for about 4 years. By the time we got finished with it, there was no reason to kickstart it. So we got that out. The minis, I really didn't like the idea of kickstarting a massive line of miniatures. I think that was going to become a quagmire for production, because sometimes we'll get into sculpting and then we'll decide, well, we need to put this on hold for a while or something. Kickstarter, once you do it, you're committed to that line and the timetable on it, and I just didn't want to get in that. So for Kickstarter, we're going to keep doing we kind of do a themed batch of sets each year. Last year was outdoor sets and a castle, and the year before that it was a city, and the year before that it was our dungeons. So we're going to keep coming back to Kickstarter for that, for themed terrain sets. But for the minis, we're just starting releasing next week. The very first set is going to be what we call turtles, with a D. So one of the things we noticed was
because you're not known at all for having a juvenile sense of humor.
Oh no, not at all. I don't care what Skeeter and Zach say; they're damn liars.
It's not just Skeeter and Zach; it's pretty much everyone I know.
One of the things we noticed was when we were looking at this was the turtle race for D&D 5e. It's very popular, but there's not many miniatures out. So we thought that would be a good way to get some immediate traction with the new minis line, was doing a few sets of these little turtle guys. So those will be the first ones. Immediately after that, we have some undead sets coming. We're trying to look for just initially a lot of the cannon fodder that DMs want a whole bunch of. So orcs, goblins, skeletons, things like that.
That makes a lot of sense, because one of the big selling points of the 3D is that once you've got your printer, the minis become insanely cheap each.
Yeah.
So
we're selling a pack of 3 mini sculpts for, I think it's going to be around $5, $5.50, something like that. So you're only going to pay about $1.50, less than $2 a mini. And then once you have those files, it's 10 cents in plastic to run out. So you can build up a massive pile of miniatures very fast for not much money.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think with that, well, first off, so we're going to go on now to talk about terrain, unless you have anything else that you want to say about the minis line. I mean, these are sold or will be sold through Drive Through RPG. Do you get them? You can get them directly from Fat Dragon 2, or did you just not even bother with doing that direct anymore?
We don't even do that direct. Everything is just sold through OBS, which is Drive Through RPG, RPG Now, and War Game Vault. We just let them handle all of our shopping cart and all of that. So,
okay. All right, let's move on now to the question of terrain, because this video is getting put side by side with one that I made with Bruce Hurst of Hurst Arts, where he just sort of talked about the relative advantages and disadvantages of different types of terrain. And I truly believe that the type of terrain that you want to use, if you're somebody who's just using a battle mat to draw stuff out and you want to up the game, There is no objective right answer about that. It depends on your particular, how crafty are you, how much money have you got, a whole bunch of different considerations. So what's your view on the various, what are the relative advantages and disadvantages of, the 3D files that you have, the Dwarven Forge, where people are buying the constructed, entirely painted thing, completely made, using paper terrain, which you've also sell as well, Hearst Arts, something where you're combining plaster cast blocks into something. What are your feelings on those the advantages and disadvantages of all those?
Well, each one, again, it's kind of serving a different pool of customers. Everybody keeps telling me, well, you all are stepping on each other's toes. You're, all in competition with each other, and we really aren't. We're hitting different segments of the customer groups out there. With something like Dwarven Forge, the advantage is you buy it, the box arrives on your doorstep, you dump it on the table, and you start playing. That's it. The disadvantage is it's somewhat expensive to do that. You can get pre-painted with that, which is a great advantage. With something like 3D printing, the advantage is it is insanely cheap versus 38 cents for a piece versus $3, $4, $5 for a piece. So if you're on a budget, you can build a much larger amount of terrain for a lot less money. The disadvantage is you're not going to buy your printer and the very next day have 200 pieces of terrain to start assembling. It's going to take you a month to print out 200 pieces. So the disadvantage is the time. Well,
another possible disadvantage, at least when you're comparing it to Hearst Arts, is that you're getting more pre-made things, whether it's Dwarven Forge or whether it's 3D printing. The chunks that you are getting, you can't micromanage what's in them, or can you? I don't know. But
well, for 3D printing, it's very easy to go in and adjust these files and tweak them before you print it out. If you want to have, take one of our standard dungeon wall pieces and take one of our skeleton miniatures and put a skeleton on the floor, you can combine them in about 3 minutes using something like Mesh Mixer and then print it out. So with 3D printing, it gives you the ability to go in and customize your files before you even print them out. The other advantage is, let's say I buy a box of pre-made terrain and it has whatever number, 20 straight dungeon walls, and my layout needs 22. Well, now I've got to go buy a whole nother box of this dungeon set just to get the 2 pieces I need. With 3D printing, if I need 2 more dungeon walls, I go and I spit out 2 more dungeon walls.
And anybody who has ever used terrain in a dungeon knows that issue about I need 2 more goddamn dungeon walls.
Exactly. And if that's all you need, that's all you print. So that's the advantage of it. The disadvantage is you're going to have to paint it. There are full color 3D printers out there, but not for home use. We're about 5 years from that for home users. Once those hit, it's a whole different ballgame then. Hewlett Packard has these machines out now that will do full color printing, and they're telling us, 4 to 5 years that'll be out for home users. So that's going to be a sea change for the hobby industry, being able to put out a full color miniature or full color piece of dungeon terrain.
Also, let me say that one of the things that you have done, not only, and I don't know so much about the 3D printing because I really haven't followed what you've been doing because I don't have a 3D printer, but one of the things about Fat Dragon Games that I really, really love, and so I'll bring it up, is the fact that when you were doing the paper terrain, you had different layers in the PDF so that people could vary the appearance. And that's really a hallmark of what you do, is that you always build in as much customization as you can into the things that you sell. So you're almost selling, several products with each product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the paper terrain was phenomenal for that because we could have 40, 50 graphic layers on it. And you could go in and on your dungeon wall, turn on, blood splatters, or turn on ivy, or make it cracked and chipped, or, whatever. But we had a bazillion different graphic options for you, and you could just go through this click list. And before you print the file out, just go and totally customize it exactly how you want it to look. Unfortunately, 3D terrain doesn't offer that flexibility. So we've to achieve something similar, we've taken a different route. And what we've done is we've partnered up with One Bookshelf, which is Drive Through RPG, and created a community creator program. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Monty Cook has one. Margaret Weiss Productions has one. And it's where you allow your customers to go in. DM's Guild is one that's just, broken off with its own website. But it's where you allow your customers to go in and modify your product and then resell it, and you get a cut then, of course. But what we've done is we have a community creator program for our 3D printer terrain. And we've got some really great designers on here. One guy, his name is William Walker, and this guy is putting out new stuff every week. He takes our base files and comes up with a new way to combine them or add some other things in to come up with all of these different variations of the original core piece that we did. And then he puts them up on OBS. And the advantage is now, if you want to buy our base set, but then you say, you know what, I need this set with this specific whatever, you can go through the community creator program, and there are just tons of these file variations, and pick the very one you need for your dungeon. So these guys are creating a lot of these variations that we would never have the time to do. I want to sit down and do the core sets, the base sets and the expansions, and then leave all of these, bazillion variations to the community creators to tackle.
Yeah, it's boring. It's boring to keep trying to make here are 40 variations on the end. You're ready to claw out your own eyeballs by the time that you get to number 40.
For these guys doing it for their home game, if they're going to go ahead and modify it, I wanted them to have a way to go ahead and throw that up and make some money off that modification. So we're just encouraging them, hey, if you're going to take this file and modify it for yourself at home, throw it up and make a few bucks.
I think that's really generous on your part too, because that's really supporting the hobby base. I mean, I know you take a cut of all of it, and that's the way OBS has done it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's a very open-minded way of saying, hey, we want all the fans out there to have the terrain that they want. Here's the base stuff that we can do, and now the people who really enjoy modifying it, they can get a little bit of money from it. The fans get the variations. So, kudos to you for that.
Well, it gets them involved in the product line, and they become salesmen for it. They'll go out on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and say, hey, look, here's my latest creation. And it benefits us because it's not really that usable without coming back and buying our core sets and stuff. So it all comes around back to us that it builds a customer base, and it keeps drawing new customers in. So it's beneficial for everybody using it. And then these guys, they'll keep supporting us, keep buying the sets, because they know if they do put the effort in for something at home, they're at least going to be able to turn around and make some money off of that time that they spend.
How well does spray-on primer work on the plastics that come out of this?
Phenomenal. What I use here is either Krylon, or lately I've been using just the generic Walmart flat gray primer, and it's working great.
Yeah, because that's my one beef with the Bones minis, is that you can't spray on primer or they get tacky, and I just want to make sure that this wasn't the same kind of thing that was gonna go on.
No, this stuff takes most people print in what's known as PLA plastic, which is polylactic acid, and it is not quite as flexible as ABS, which is what Legos are made out of. Those have a little more flex, but it is a very nice hard plastic.
Dude, Legos are not flexible. Legos are not flexible. Have you ever stepped on a Lego that one of your kids has left on the floor?
Oh yeah, but if you take one of the flat plate Legos, there is a flex to it. These are it's a more brittle plastic, but the advantage is, and this is something most people don't know, is polylactic acid plastic is made from corn syrup, and it is entirely biodegradable. So, the stuff 200 years now is not going to be sitting in a dump somewhere. It will degrade because it is made out of corn.
So that's a downside. That's a downside for all our immortal gamers.
Well, there you go.
Your miniatures will eventually degrade
in a compost heap. If you don't put them in that, it'll last. But
that was a curveball, Tom. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have thoughts, and sometimes I have good.
You cut out again.
I said something really funny.
No, you didn't.
I did. I totally did. I was saying, sometimes that was a curveball. Sometimes I have good thoughts. Sometimes I have, thoughts, and they all come out. So, all right. So let me now one more step in that process. Talk about the relative advantages of the 3D terrain versus plaster cast terrain like Hearst Arts.
Well, I don't know if I can. I've never used plaster cast terrains. I don't know that much about it. So again, I really don't have any prior experience with it to compare it to.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't know how long it takes to make. I don't know any of the, how brittle it is or anything like that. I don't know how. I imagine if it's using like a dental plaster, it's probably pretty heavy. But
yeah, it's going to be it's going to be heavier than plastic. And all right, well, I have a different question then to swing to. So somebody like me, who has no 3D printer, has never really researched it. Do you have any guidelines on your site that are a walkthrough to, here's how you get your 3D printer, here's the plastic that you need, and then you can use our stuff, and here's how you do it? Or is that something where you're just leaving it to people to, find?
No. We will guide you through all of it. We have a beginner's guide that we include with every set that walks you through basic prep and what settings you need to use, things like that. On our website forums and on our Facebook group, we have a ton of information for new people to the hobby. So we will walk you through every step of the way. People think it's going to be a lot harder than what it is. It's not. It takes you a few weeks to kind of get the hang of it, to really there are people that start printing 20 minutes after they get the printer and start spitting out beautiful models. But by and large, it usually takes about a week or two to get really proficient at it, to where you can just put the settings in and then walk away and know you're going to get a great model off the bed. But again, it's not that hard. It doesn't take that long. A couple weeks into it, you'll be all set.
Okay. And then I guess, okay, so here's my question. This is purely me, because there's, nobody else that I know of who drives a camera through a mega dungeon for stuff. But so my problem with everything that's out there, except for the Hearst Arts, which I can build up to my own height needed, is that I need walls that are like twice normal size because of the camera horizon going up too high. Any fix on that? Or is that just basically something where I'd have to prop up more walls behind it or something like that?
No, well, there's two solutions. One is we sell extra tall walls as part of our terrain series. We've got 3-inch tall walls in one of the sets. The other thing is, if you're wanting to do camera walkthroughs, you can always change the dimensions on this stuff in the printer. Think of it like a copy machine where you're setting scaling.
All right, so you and I are going to be talking afterwards about me getting a 3D printer and starting using the Dragon Lock stuff, because if I can change the scale on the stuff, then you have
we've got I've got one customer that took one of our World War Tesla mechs, which was about 3.5-inch tall mech. He sent me a picture of it. He blew it up to like 18 inches to put in his office. So yeah, you can scale as long as you have a printer that will accommodate it. And most printers are going to have anywhere from probably a 6x6 to about a 10x10 print area. So as long as you're not going over that, you can scale up or down as much as you like.
Okay, awesome. So, all right. Tom's company is Fat Dragon Games. The Facebook is Dragon Lock, is the Facebook group. It's sold through One Bookshelf, which is the same as Drive Through RPG and RPG Now. You heard the discussion of it. I am, after this discussion, and now Tom and I have known each other for years and years. And over the course of this one conversation, he's convinced me that I'm going to try out this new technology, and getting me to try out new technology is not easy. I mean, because this is my phone. This is a landline phone. So that gives you some idea of how technology resistant I am. So Tom, well, I'm going to try it and see how it works.
Okay, great.
So, all right, well, let's wrap it up, and in a second, I'll hit the button that takes you and me back to a non-broadcasting area in the Hangout. So go ahead and say goodbye to all of your fans that are out there, unless you got something else you want to add.
Goodbye, fans.
All right,
All
and
three of you.
I will say to all my folks, no matter what kind of Dungeons and Dragons it is that you play, imagine the hell out of it.